Hello and welcome to the end of the year tag. I am Kira the Scrivener, and this is a tag that I created last year that I really love doing. I love the end of the year tags that ask questions about the end of the year and how we're approaching it and stuff, but I think it's also really important to ask questions about reflection. I really love reflection. It's probably a too much issue in my life that I'm let me ponder these things. So we're gonna ponder some things, we're gonna discuss some things, and hopefully ask some lovely questions. And yeah, the first question is, how do you feel about this year? And you can either use an adjective or you can expand some. And I'm gonna expand a little bit because I feel like the context of my year is important for how I'm going to talk about everything else, because this is my first end of the year video and I want to kind of give some context to my life. I began with a lot of hope, a lot of energy, a lot of things that I wanted to do, and I was in school, and in the end of February my grandfather passed away very suddenly. I was called and I didn't get to speak to him, and he passed away without me ever saying goodbye, and that was a lot. And then 2 months later I also found out that my other grandfather had cancer. Thankfully he had surgery and recovered, but because he was 95 they were telling us that if the surgery didn't work that there was no way they could do chemo on him. So it was just a 5-month period of grieving very hard, and then being am I going to lose my other grandfather right at the same time? In the midst of that I got in a car accident and broke a rib and had a concussion and had COVID, and then I also found out that I probably have MS. I did a video about that last week, kind of talking about the details about it, because it's something that I hadn't publicly shared, but was going through most of the year. I was struggling very deeply, not only with grief, but also what grief meant for my own life if I had MS. So yeah, it was a really crazy year that just did not kind of stop. I had a lot of things just hitting me over the head, and I wanted to take a time and rest and allow myself to grieve and allow myself to accept things, but I kept on being whammied again. With my pain being as bad as it was, I wasn't even able to do audiobooks. So a lot of the year I did read, but I read in bursts when I felt up to it, but most of the year I didn't read very much. And what my not reading is very different from other people. We all read at different paces and at different times, but for me I read 124 books so far. I think I'm going to finish at least 2 more by the end tomorrow, which is the last day of the year. And when you're going to be seeing this, I know some of you also have had really hard years, and I want to say that you're not alone in that it's okay when there's times when we have bright spots, but none of the bright spots shine over the bad spots that we have. If the hurt shines greatest of all in a year, even though that year had good parts, that's okay. And you're not alone in that. And there'll always be next year, and maybe next year will be a little bit better. So question number 2 asks, what are 2 phases or authors that you really got into? Because I tend to be a mood reader, and I said 2, but we all knew I was going to do more, and you are more than welcome to do more as well. For me, my books are never cohesive. They are always a mattering of random moods I'm in. So these are 4 moods that I found myself in, and the first one is fantasy. At the beginning of the year I read 4 or 5 fantasy books, and then in November I also did that, so I thought I would share that. And that is Gilded, Small Favors, A Snake Falls to Earth, Gods of Jade and Shadow. And then later in the year, Babel, Foul Lady Fortune, Curses, and Fevered Star. And I really love them. Fantasy used to be the book series that I read the most. I used to have something 70 to 80% of the books that I read were fantasy, and I miss that. I actually want to be more intentional with that in 2023. Then the second one was plays. I read 5 plays this year, and I think they were all 4 to 5 stars. I really loved all of them. They were Lady Windermere's Fan, Medea, A Raisin in the Sun, 12 Angry Men, and A Doll's House. And it was just really fun. I really want to do something about plays in 2023 as well, because I love it. And the next one is 19th century works. And I have always admired the Victorian age from afar. I've always geared more toward the 20th century when it comes to classics and stuff. But I read a lot of Jane Austen, I read a lot of Victorian, and I read a lot of books that were either retellings or war histories or nonfictions that touched on the 19th century as well. So I kind of wanted to shout some of these out. And we have The Warden, The Barchester Chronicles, Lady Windermere's Fan, Pride and Prejudice, Mad and Bad, Real Heroines of the Regency, Persuasion, Harris, Silly Novels by Lady Novelists, Sense and Sensibility, On Foot to Canterbury, The Mayor of Casterbridge, David Copperfield, Wuthering Heights, A Secret Sisterhood, Babel, Out of the Sun, Sonnets from the Portuguese. Then my last thing was Agatha Christie. I read 7 Agatha Christies, 6 of them in 3 days. I had a really bad cold, and I did not move except for to hit the play button and then find a new Agatha Christie book. I have read Agatha Christie beforehand and I liked her books and then had some duds. So I was really lovely to have some wonderful books by her again. And then question 3 is, what is a book you regret not reading? And this has to be Kim Ji-yeon, 1982. I have it somewhere up here. And I read the beginning of it. I read, I think, about 60 pages of it and really, really loved it. And then I never finished it. And I have huge regrets because I am almost sure that it would have been a favorite of the year. I really, really enjoyed the parts that I read. I researched it and read thoughts on it and pondered about it, and I just never finished it. Question number 4, what is something that you learned from this year? So normally in this, I kind of talk about a nonfiction book and what I learned from this. And this is kind of from a nonfiction book, but in the mornings, because I've been kind of stressed and just dealing with extra anxiety and the world and everything like that, I've been taking times in the morning where I'm not on my phone and I will allow myself to just go along the world in quietness and to read my Bible and to read Henry Nouwen, a man who was a psychologist and a priest. And in that, I also thought about allowing myself quietness in my reading. As I said, I did not read a low amount of books. 125 books is a lot of books. It wasn't books that I necessarily loved all the time. And allowing myself to have mercy with myself as a physical reader, because I did read a lot of physical books this year, more than I probably have in previous years. When I was reading the last few books, I was kind of timing myself a little bit to kind of see what I was reading, because I've always known I was a slow reader. But I have identified that I am between 10 to 20 pages an hour. The average person reads 40 pages an hour, and a lot of fast readers read up to 68 pages an hour. And I read 10 to 20. So I was reading Jabba Lahiri and I was 10 pages an hour. And I think with Kim Ji-yeon and other books, I have to have compassion, because part of me wants to dedicate time to really sit and push through it, but often I can't. If we're looking at a 200-page book, it's gonna take me 15 to 20 hours to read it. So I think having compassion and also identifying that I do get more frustrated at myself. If I sit down and I say I have to read this book, I will get frustrated and not enjoy the book as much because I'm trying to push myself. So identifying that it's okay if it takes me a really long time to read books. It annoys me because this is a book that I really love, and Jump with Larry, I loved last year and I'm still finishing it a year later. Because I do think that I sometimes get frustrated because I'll only, if I pick up to read somewhere, I'll often only read a few pages because it'll be half an hour of reading, and I'll read 5 pages and then I'll be I'm in the middle of a chapter or something like that. So I think that's sometimes why I do that, and seeing that and have mercy on that and okay, how can I identify that? We'll look in the next year. And then question number 5 is, what is a book you wish you talked about more? And this is New Kid by Jerry Craft. I really, really liked this book. I think that it should be in every school because it deals with this young boy who, I don't know, he's about 12 and he lives in New York City. He used to go to a local school and now he's going to a more prestigious school that is almost primarily entirely white. And it is him and one other boy who are Black in the school. And they have a relationship, and it deals with microaggressions and the ways in which racism happens in schools and stuff. And it's a really, really good book, and I really, really enjoy that it deals well with friendships, and also deals well with racial things, and it deals well with the interpersonal and really personal things, and then on the bigger scope things as well. And I just really love it as a book. And then question 6 is, what are some of your favorite non-bookish things? And I really, really love this because we all have lives outside of books, and Pride and Prejudice pretty much books things. And I really, really loved it. I started listening to it when I had my concussion and I just needed something compassionately. And they got me so hooked on it that I reread Pride and Prejudice because I just needed to be more enmeshed in this. And it's so good. So pretty much the premise is Molly's never read any Jane Austen and Becca has read most of them. And it's really fun because Molly comes in with fresh eyes. They have great banter and chemistry as co-hosts. They are marvelous at it. As Molly reads Sense and Sensibility, she's a little bit more knowledge, and I read Sense and Sensibility for the first time this year. And I found the podcast probably when I read 10 chapters. So then I read that, and then as I read the rest of it, I also found as a slow reader, it was a nice reward because I would read 2 chapters. I would listen to their discussion on it, and they had anywhere between, if it's a packed book, it might be 1 chapter, but it's normally about 2 to 3 chapters. And it was very nice because it would take me about, half an hour to an hour to read a chapter. And then I would get a reward, and it helped really and I really enjoy reading and discussing books with people. So it felt that way. I was discussing with friends, and right now they're doing Emma, and it's killing me. She is getting better at it, and it's great, but Emma is my favorite book, and I just want to hear all of their thoughts, and there's so many cliffhangers, and it's killing me, and it's making me really happy. But I love that they have study questions, and they talk about the social dynamics and the stories and development, and it's just very funny and entertaining, but also really educational, and I love it. And then another podcast that is incredibly educational but also incredibly funny is Maintenance Phase. This takes a very subversive look at diet culture and wellness culture, and I really, really appreciate it. I have an eating disorder. I was incredibly underweight for about 10 years of my life, and it became a really, really big issue because I couldn't get out of the cycle of that and the ways in which we tell society, and it was very difficult when I did gain weight. One of the stories that I have to tell is I went to the doctor, and I went to a new doctor, and she was asking my medical history, and I was like, I have anorexia, but I've gained 50 pounds and like, you know, I'm really proud of that and stuff. And she turned to me and was like, so we should put you on a weight loss drug because you shouldn't have gained 50 pounds in like a year and a half. That's way too much. And I was like, no, like I was incredibly underweight. Like gaining 50 pounds is like one of the things that I'm most proud of. Like I still really struggle with disordered eating and with like the mind things, but like the fact that I've been able to maintain a healthy weight for this long is like incredibly healthy. But like I've also dealt with it in general. When I started gaining weight, people started making comments about the fact that I gained weight. And I'm like, you guys know I've had an eating disorder. I've been like incredibly underweight for all of these years. And it's only when I start to be a normal weight that people start like making rude and terrible comments about my body. And I was like, my body, and what I believe very firmly is that people have set weights. Looking at my body and my structure and my family, I should never have been a size 0. That is never going to be the size. We all have weights in which we're geared toward. And when we try to pretend like they're not, like my body reacted. Like I probably did gain more weight because I spent 10 years starving my body. Of course my body is going to be like, yes, we will take all the weight as possible. Like they're trying to keep me from starvation. That's how bodies work. So being at peace in my body, like I still struggle with disordered eating. I still struggle with the way that my body looks, but establishing the fact that like it's okay and that's how body is. And I really, really enjoy the podcast. It's also incredibly funny and ridiculous and just like the humor and the callbacks, but it also really takes a critical look at the ways in which diet culture and how it's not effective. Like people will say like the ways in which we bully and harass people, the ways in which we like sell diet culture, like they never actually, like they normally just encourage binging or other things in which people will eat because like people need food to survive and people can eat the same amount of food and look different ways. That's how bodies happen. So like the ways in which diet culture just enforces people to have disordered eating and normally to actually gain weight, which, you know, gaining weight is not a bad thing. They villainize gaining weight, but normally the things of starving yourself and not eating actually causes you to gain weight. So it's like, it's really, really absurd. And yeah, it also looks at the ways in which fat phobia exists and the ways in which we discriminate against fat people. And it's a really, really good podcast and I really, really love it. And I would say that I have found parts of it triggering and stuff like that, but in most parts it's not because one of the co-hosts, Audrey Gordon, is, as she describes herself, a fat lady around town. And she's wonderful. And like, because of the fact that it's own voices and talking about it from that point of view and being critical, even when it's exploring and stating people that are incredibly fat phobic and things like that, it is always with a critical eye. It's almost at like, this is absurd. So even though it's talking about really harmful material, I never find it particularly triggering. Like there's some times in which I, you know, will go down a thing and be like, oh my goodness, like this is how people see my body and all of these things. And it just like becomes really difficult. But in most cases, I think that it is a thing that even if you've had disordered eating and stuff like that, it actually makes you feel like you can punch back in a way that is not literally punching people, rather than it making you feel more traumatized, which I love. And then I just have Familia by Camila Cabello. I love breakup albums so much. I'm sad they broke up, but I love the breakup songs and they are wonderful. And I hope they get back together and then we have beautiful love songs again. Like, you know, that's what I want in life. And then Why Women Kill, such a fabulous show. Satirical, beautiful, looking at social commentary, lovely. And then 2 shows that I am obsessed with that both deal with grief that I watched too many times. Both I discovered late in 2021 and then rewatched multiple times in 2022. The first one is Zoe's Extraordinary Playlist. I love it. Pretty much the premise is Zoe is around 28 and she is, you know, a coder in a tech thing that is almost all male. And her father has a rare neurological disease and he has lost the ability to speak and is slowly dying. And she is getting headaches and is just stressed, so she goes for an MRI and an earthquake happens and she ends up getting magical abilities to hear people sing with their innermost thoughts. The magic of why things happen isn't really what matters. Like, it's most of things like, it's, you know, soft magic system. Like, why she has the ability to hear people's innermost thoughts doesn't really matter because everything else is grounded in reality. You just have to accept that. So I really, really love it. Musical theater is my favorite thing. I love this. You know, I didn't watch Glee, but I like watch snippets of them singing Glee because I just love that trope so much. So this one is so good. And what I love particularly about it is it's off the wall and funny and hilarious sometimes, but it's also incredibly deep and deals with really complex issues in really meaningful things. I think that because of the fact that one of the producers or writers had someone in their family who had this disease, like, it is treated with incredibly respect. And then we also have her, she's a crush on a guy who she thinks is like super energetic and she's a little shyer and stuff. And he is, you know, like off the wall and encouraging and like, you know, outgoing and all of these things. And then she hears him singing Mad World and she's like, this is like, and crying and looking at a photograph. and she ends up talking to him and finding out that his father died of suicide, and that he's holding all of this grief inside, and they have this relationship talking about grief because her father is dying, his father has died. And sadly the show got canceled after 2 seasons, but it is a remarkable 26 episodes, and then they did a Christmas special. I recently watched the Christmas special, and I love the fact that it allows us to sit in the pain, it allows us to sit in the grief, and it has great moments of humor and joy, but it's never humor that cuts the pain. Like, it allows you to fully establish the pain without cutting for humor, but it's also very funny. And I love things that are seriously dealing with things when also having a lot of humor. And I think this show is great. And I rewatched it, I think 3 times in 2022. I have a little bit of an issue. I rewatched it mostly with my friend, and then we've just been rewatching it. We also have really strong opinions about the couples. And then the other one is Never Have I Ever, which I really, really love. I, again, had watched it in November, and then I rewatched it after my grandfather died because this deals with Davy. She is 15 years old. She is going into her sophomore year, and in the end of her freshman year, during the time in which she was playing, her father died of a heart attack very suddenly. And in the week after, she collapsed and her legs stopped moving. And this is also something that happened to one of the writer's cousins, I think. So I think that both of them deal with neurological issues without pretending like it's fake, without dealing with anything. And it deals with such things of how grief and our bodies coexist. And I really, really enjoy this. It deals with grief, and grief continues to come up in all 3 seasons. The 3rd season came out in this year as well. And I really appreciate that it never allows it to, she wants to date, she wants to do these things, she wants to get popular. But in the end, she also sees her therapist and she'll ask, but what about the grief? But how does this connect to this? And it allows us to have, it is more on the funny side than the serious side when it comes to Zoe's, but it does really allow us to have those moments where it talks about grief. And I laugh and I relate to her in high school a lot. And then I also relate to her grief and the stories that she's going through. And it made me cry before my grandfather passed away, and it made me cry again after. I really, really enjoy the series. And then on a slightly lighter note, I noted that I have been watching Downton Abbey and I really enjoy it. I'm in season 5. I really love it. I had tried to watch it twice before and never got into it, and now I've gotten into it and I really love it. And then question number 7 is, what is the greatest outlier in your book? I love this because we all read books and then sometimes we have outliers, and this one is On Foot to Canterbury. I thought that this was a really interesting travel log, and he is a Canadian guy who lives kind of just about an hour north of me, and yeah, he's a librarian. He wanted to go on this pilgrimage with his father, who is Catholic, and then his father ended up dying, and he ended up going on this pilgrimage alone. And I like it because I love Europe for this reason. I really want to go to England because he's just going every 5 feet. There's history. He's like Jane Austen, William Shakespeare, Rome, Chaucer, all of these things, and it's so cool. There's so much history just jam-packed into everything, and I kept on smiling with such a huge smile because I love history, and I love that all of these things are connected, and I really, really enjoyed this. And he also talked about as much as he wanted this to be a great spiritual or a great whatever, he can't really get away from the things of life. He is still thinking about these things, and it isn't really bringing him closer to any knowledge, but he is enjoying his time. And I appreciate the honestness of it, and it's not greatly written, but it just allows you to have time and think about things, and I would really recommend it. And then question number 8 is, what book are you most excited to revisit? And that has to be Today a Woman Went Mad in the Supermarket. I really, really love this book. I really love 1960s short stories. I like short stories by women in general, and this made me so happy. They were originally published in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, and then she rewrote one in 2020 to deal with the pandemic, because most of them deal with different characters, but I think in the probably 10 to 15 stories, there's probably 3 or 4 that follow the same couple through their lives. So we also get to revisit them in 2020 and how their lives look in the pandemic. And I really love this collection. It made me smile ear to ear, and I related to many of the characters, and I laughed a lot, and it was just really well done. So I think rereading it will be a joy. And then question number 9 is, what videos are you most proud of? And I have a few. I'm never good at things. I never love talking about the things that I make, but I think I am really, really proud of these videos. Even though I talked about this being a little bit of a harder year, I did make some videos that I'm really proud of. So the first one is Snow White to Mirabelle. This is a 3-minute video that I made right at the beginning. It was my first video of 2022. And it traces Snow White to Mirabelle, and I talk about it in it, combining my family relationship, my grandmother, who was born in the 1930s, and her experiences versus my experience, and how we can have compassion for our ancestors and the people in our family who are more conservative and have different views. And I was talking about how much I was watching Snow White, and I actually still haven't finished that movie. I watched I think 45 minutes of it and got like caught up in writing this essay, and then I filmed this video and I never finished Snow White. But I was shocked because Snow White was doing so much cleaning. And like that's something my grandmother does like obsessively, just like cleaning and cleaning and cleaning and like gathering her worth so much from cleaning. And as a woman who grew up incredibly poor during the Great Depression, and watching this and being like, okay, how can I see how these themes and things are important, and how like, you know, we see these characters who are like, we see the dwarves, their comic relief, getting more screen time and like more time to their random antics that aren't even funny, rather than Snow White actually having like character development, versus like watching something like Mirabelle in Encanto, and like that movie is so beautiful, and watching the ways in which we see women and the ways in which I saw women growing up, and like even though that was incredibly flawed in many ways, but the ways in which women are allowed to inhabit space and the way in which women were allowed to inhabit space in the 1930s, and how can that allow me to understand and respect my grandparents in a way that like I can have mercy, because what is their understanding of womanhood, what was their understanding of sharing emotions and stuff that isn't as open for me. And I really appreciated making that video. Like I love being able to combine my own personal experiences with creative things, so that made me really happy. It was my first time editing movie clips and like voiceover and stuff like that. Like it's not the highest quality, but I really enjoyed making it, and it's very short, so I would love to make things like that. Like I love video essays, and that's kind of how I got into this thing, like film analysis and stuff, and I've never fully dived in, but that was like my short thing that I did, and I really enjoyed doing that. Another video that I really liked making was why reading banned books matter. I did this video in September for Banned Book Week. I like talking about it because I kind of wanted to differentiate between why we might say that things are going to be banned versus why things are banned, because like I wanted to take things like The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison or other books that deal with a lot of traumatic things and saying, okay, like I can understand in good faith why someone wants this banned, because it's like a traumatic thing to read. Like I read The Bluest Eye and I couldn't read a book for another week. Like it really put me in a funk, because like a lot of us have experienced things similarly. And then I also talk about why those are important things to discuss in classrooms, why those things are important, because we can't just pretend like children aren't going to experience these things, and how giving them the tools to have conversations about this is actually really important. And then also talking about bad faith takes in which, you know, like speech, and that it's, you know, talking about rape culture, and in it is being banned for being against male students, or the kite runner that is being banned for religious content, and it's like, yeah, the guy's Muslim. You know, Muslim people live in America, they live in Canada. That's not a reason to be banned. I think it is really important sometimes to just yell at the absurdity of people being bigoted, but I think it's also really important to be like, okay, let's have a conversation about this. So when people are talking about this, they can say like, this is why it's important to talk about these things, not just because of these things, but these are important issues that need to be talked about, and this is how it can help children to talk about these issues. I think that sometimes we just like, you know, do the Elsa, conceal, not feel. And then I also did something else related to Encanto, which I loved, recommending books to the magical family. And this video really underperformed. Like it underperformed what I like normally even get on basic videos. And I was like, oh, okay, whatever. I put my heart to it. I really loved the video because I went through like what I could glean from each character. And then I specifically recommended books to each character based not only what I thought that their character would enjoy, what like traits they had, what stories they were going through. And I really tried to stick with like classics or books that weren't parts in cities and stuff like that, like books that would kind of not look out of place in an Encanto world. And I really enjoyed doing that. Like it is one of my favorite videos I've still made. I wanted to do it with other franchises and stuff, but because of the fact that it underperformed so badly and then my grandfather passed away like 2 weeks later, I never ended up like getting back on that wagon. But it is something that I really enjoyed, and like I really am like giving specific recommendations, so I hope to do more of that in this year. For another kind of sad book that I want to talk about is Don't Cry for Me by Daniel Black. This is one of my favorite books of 2022. I really loved it, and it is my only book review of this year. And in the book review, I talk about the story, I talk about how it's about a man who's kind of apologizing to his son but saying, don't cry for me. Like I don't deserve mercy, I don't deserve forgiveness, I'm just asking to explain myself. And again, kind of what I was talking about before, it echoes the divisions between families, how it's hard to understand. Like he talks about growing up, toxic masculinity, how his parents weren't there, so he was raised by his grandparents who were born into slavery, and then understanding his gay son was something that he didn't have the words for. And like it's such a book that talks about the ways he was conditioned to treat people badly, but also how that doesn't excuse him. Just because he was conditioned to accept things as certain realities does not excuse him for the abuse or the mistreatment or the neglect he gave to other people, but it also explains why. And I talked about, again, the division between family. And this is a book that I read shortly after my grandfather passed away. And it really, really struck me as someone who, I love him with my whole heart, but we always had disagreements because in there I specifically talk about me working with people with addictions and his father being a man who had addiction and abused him, and how he never could really understand why I would give people a second chance, because to him, his father had all the second chances in the world and continued to abuse and neglect the family and steal money from them, and how much pressure that put on him. And I can understand, and like having an understanding, I could just call him a bigot and call him, you know, you don't care about people who use drugs, you don't care about, you know, the marginalized, you don't care about these things. But to be able to look at someone and say, this is why you have a certain amount of story, and how I understand that, you know, I could yell at you about how you need to be a better person, but like that doesn't necessarily mean that he's not a kind person. My grandfather was an incredibly kind and incredibly compassionate man, and he had some blind spots. And being able to look at him compassionately, and it was very nice that one of my last conversations with him was him saying to me, I'm really glad you do this work, and him acknowledging that he would never want to do that work, and he might not completely believe that, you know, people can be redeemed who are addicts, but that didn't keep him from being like, okay, I'm happy. And us being able to kind of, you know, our love was always there, but sometimes our political divides would keep us separated or argue about things that, like, yes, matter, but like I never was in doubt that my grandparents were kind people. I was just in doubt sometimes that the ways in which they spoke about things were ignorant. And I believe that people can be ignorant and can be accountable for what they are ignorant, but we can also understand why some of those ignorance might exist. And that kind of like what I was talking about with reading banned books, I believe that understanding why people might be ignorant or biased against things helps them to understand how we can reach them, rather than just being like, they're bigoted, I'm never going to talk to them again. And yeah, I guess all of these books that I'm kind of talking about is all dealing with family dynamics and how do we branch between generations and how do we talk about things. And those are things that are incredibly important to me, and I'm glad that I got to express those things. Like, I love making fun videos, I like just talking about the books that I read, but those are core values in myself, and I think they're values that I express a lot in my personal life, but I sometimes struggle on how to do it on here without being preachy or being too emotional or being too personal. So I'm really glad that I got to use those videos as ways to do that. So those are some of my things that I really loved. I'm realizing right now that I failed my own book tag by missing question 10, which is, what is your favorite last line? I did it last year because I just read A Tale of Two Cities and I was like, that's a perfect answer for that. And like, last lines never get great answers, but I can't think of one off the top of my head, so I'm failing that. And then question 11, which is a bonus, is to shout people out. And I love to admit that I am not particularly great at shouting people out. I used to try to do book shoutouts, and I haven't done one since 2018, which says a lot of things. I actually am going to use a draft of some shoutouts that I plan to do in the summer, and then I rewrote in the fall, and then it kept on getting outdated because I was shouting out their videos particularly. But this is a group of booktubers that I mostly found this year or started watching regularly this year, or some of them came back, and I really enjoy their content, and I would love to give them a full shout out. But apparently my brain just is like very insecure about shouting. I have a specific block about speaking about other people, specifically because I think I have a big thing, like I hate being misunderstood, and I always worry and hyper focus and like stress that I will like somehow misunderstand or misrepresent someone, and then that will hurt them. Like, most people would probably prefer to be like slightly misrepresented, like at least in a good way, than not shouted out at all. But my brain, we have all specific things that we struggle with. So this is my list of people that I meant to shout out earlier in the year, and I think they're all really, really incredible, and I also am tagging them as well, and here they are. Jen Campbell, Monika from Dog-Eared Musings, Shelby's Book Club, Coynie reads, Jasmine Liberty, she just returned, Camila, Morgan, A Day in Small Things, ComfyCozyUp, and Alicia. And these are all channels that I really, really love, and I'm really, really excited to see more of their things in 2023. They're all incredibly thoughtful booktubers that I just really enjoy listening to. Like, I feel relaxed, I feel educated, I feel encouraged, and I just like sit there and I'm like, yeah, these are people like I like listening to. So I hope that you will enjoy listening to them and that you hopefully enjoyed listening to me. I would love if you would do this tag, and I will see you in 2023.